Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar podcast, to the review of day 2 of Content Day 2025. 13 drivers to chat about on the way today. A whole mix of names, including the 3 Penske's. We've got the introduction of Prema today and a few other bits and bobs that we will go over. If you haven't listened to day 1 already, listen back. 16 drivers reviewed yesterday, as well as the Fox Sports news and a bit of previewing towards the 2027 car, which we'll root back on a bit later today. But Archie, it's a good day. 9 drivers spoken to between the two of us. A lot of interesting insight, and we'll have a lot of topics to chat about today from a whole different range of drivers. Some rookies today, some champions, Indy 500 winners, Indy only. Had a bit of everything today.
Yeah, it's been a tiring couple of days, Dan. But to be honest, this is 2 of my favourite days of the year. I mean, Content Day wrapping up is only the start, really, of us kind of providing you all of the content, obviously with these end of day shows, but also over the coming days, weeks, month or so, I mean 6 weeks or so until cars hit the track for opening practice in St. Pete. We will be bringing all sorts of content that has been gathered over the last couple of days from the entire field. So yeah, it's been a lot of time for us, obviously being virtual, sitting in front of a screen, but worth it.
My head's exploding.
Yeah, eyes are going a bit square. Maybe need a bit of time away from the laptop.
Want a big nap?
Yeah, it's been such a cool couple of days. It's always nice hearing from other drivers and what they've been up to over the off season and their take on all the big talking points, their own last year, and reflecting, looking ahead to this year to come in 2025. So yeah, it's been good. Can't wait to recap this second half.
A bit of an earlier recording today there for you viewers. As I said yesterday, at some point it's about 10 to 1 when we're still going. It's only 9:30 tonight. We weren't even ended at this point yesterday, so weren't even close to finishing. So yeah, we'll have a bit more of a sleepy night. Maybe this might actually go on the day. We'll see. Depends how quickly I can edit it. Hey, we'll see.
Yeah, so I mean, yesterday was, I think we had 9 hours worth, didn't we? It went from about 8 a.m. local until 5 p.m. local, I think, which was 1 until 10 for us. Today was 7 hours, so finished 2 hours earlier.
Let's start off with the first driver of the day, who was Stingray Rob, 13 in 3 years, as he switches over from AJ Foyt Racing to Juncos Hollinger Racing alongside Connor Daly in the number 77 entry. Didn't get too much out of Stingray. Looking to improve qualifying was his main improvement point ahead of 2025, something that he's really struggled with. His qualifying performances weren't good. There was only one above the top 20 throughout the course of 2024, I said. One thing I took out from that was he seemed to be caught a bit off guard by David Malukas' signing. Didn't really seem to have much idea that it was happening. So seemed to have no idea, and he said the writing was on the wall at that point, which I thought was rather interesting. Obviously, at that point, needed to start looking at different options.
Yeah, I asked Stingray to kick the day off, basically, just how the move had come about to Juncos Hollinger Racing, because, I mean, we hadn't really heard from Stingray since this was announced in, I don't know, when was it announced? Was it December? I feel like it was...
Season ended, so November, December, so...
It was definitely back end of the year, but yeah, essentially he felt, or he didn't say this directly, but I think the inference was that he had been a bit blindsided by the fact that the team had brought David Malukas on board to partner with Santino Ferrucci, which, you know, I think what Rob said was the writing was on the wall, essentially. As soon as Malukas came on board, he knew that they would want to keep hold of Ferrucci, who had got them a pole position, for instance, at Portland, and was their guy. He broke into the top 10 in the championship, had an unbelievable rise last season. So yeah, this has left Rob essentially in a third team in as many years in IndyCar, having started off at Dale Coyne Racing, moved to AJ Foyt Racing, and then now ending up at Juncos Hollinger Racing. And I think he said at this point he does want continuity. He's actually seeing the positives from being at so many different teams. He said that they're all different with new lessons to learn, and he likes to see, you know, the certain trends that he can pick up and who he should lean on and stuff like that. So he's taken lessons from it, but it can't be particularly helpful kind of chopping and changing. This is a situation he's familiar with. He rose up through the American Open Wheel Junior ranks for several years, actually, with Juncos Hollinger Racing. He won the championship with them in USF Pro 2000, which is the kind of third rung on the ladder. But when he departed the team, there was a bit of a breakup in relationship. It wasn't an amicable breakup with team owner Ricardo Juncos, and that was something that had to be fixed to get this deal over the line. I thought he spoke quite candidly actually about that, how they were not on good terms, but they had an honest conversation and they're back on good terms. There's a lot of familiarity around the team for Rob. This time he isn't switching engine manufacturer. He's going from a Chevrolet team to a Chevrolet team, which should hopefully allow this to be a little bit more seamless. But he just wants to kind of kick on now, make the next step. He feels like he improved in his sophomore year last year, but still made what he describes as a lot of little mistakes. He said he was running well a few times and there was bad luck. His steering wheel failed at Barber. St. Pete, he had a brake failure in the season opener. He had a mechanical failure in Toronto. So he wants to be quicker. Yes, as you say, Dan, in qualifying that particularly pertains to, but also just generally wants to be a bit more consistent, find that consistency.
Interestingly, is Ricardo's brother was his mechanic in 2020, apparently. It was a small little nugget I got from that. But yeah, that's probably it for I've got for Stingray Rob. Not really too much there, but a third team in 3 years. Then we had Ed Carpenter, who's obviously he still is an owner driver, just about. Doing the one race a year, obviously stepping away to only do the Indy 500 now. Got a big new partner on board in the off-season of Heartland Foods and Ted Gelov. Obviously signed Alexander Rossi, his playing friend, in the off-season as well. Says the team hasn't actually had as much change as you think on a personnel perspective, because people were sort of guessing that they'd have a big influx of new staff. Said there wasn't as much change as they thought. In regards to the rebrand, he actually thought about it before Gelov came on board, but he just said it was a good time to do that rebrand. As we spoke about, the logo that we both absolutely despise was added. Not happy with recent results. That's not really surprising, but he said that stepping back was personally the right time for him to do the Indy 500 only, and that Rasmussen did a better job than he did on the remaining ovals at the back end of last year.
Yeah, I think that was interesting that he said essentially when I asked him that he feels like his focus now needs to be elsewhere in the team, and that driving, all of the ovals was no longer something that was a must for him. He feels like he is most useful now in the Indy 500 and nowhere else. And I think obviously Rasmussen's results when Carpenter made that decision late last season to put his rookie teammate in the car kind of, that paid off. So I think it's very self-aware from Ed. I think that's something we kind of said at the time about that. So yeah, that was kind of the biggest thing, really. I think that just as well, the fact that Rinus VK departing was a team decision, and ultimately he came to the decision that Rasmussen was a better option. He said that he wasn't going to get too deep into that, but essentially said the team isn't where they needed to be. He told me that the team couldn't keep doing what they were doing. So they sold this vision to Alexander Rossi. And yeah, I think it's what Carpenter has said. It's the biggest reset essentially since the team were founded in 2012. And the target with all of this, with this new funding, is essentially just to get back to where they were at the start when you had Joseph Newgarden there in the early days. He was winning races, and they really want to get back to those early days. But there's excitement, I think, at Ed Carpenter Racing. I mean, yeah, it seems positive. We'll get onto Christian Rasmussen shortly, but both Ed Carpenter and Christian Rasmussen today were very encouraged, and that was off the back of obviously Alexander Rossi saying and kind of really, stating his belief in this long-term project that he's agreed to yesterday.
For those of you interested, for VK, the decision was made after the investment was brought on board. That was a sort of joint decision. Obviously, they said it wasn't an investment decision, but it was a decision made after it came in, and that was just time to move in different directions. Spoke very highly of VK, but just said it was time to move in a different direction for the pair.
Yeah, the one other thing that I asked Carpenter was the kind of question we've been trying to pose to a few drivers about the prospects of a new car in 2027, which Alexander Rossi obviously told us yesterday quite firmly it's happening. But yeah, Ed kind of agrees, and the sentiment was very similar today, that it's definitely time for a new car. He said that it's important they don't make mistakes with it. He likes the style of racing, but yeah, feels it's time for a bit of a refresh in the coming years.
Let's go on to the driver Reinbold pair, who are a bit of a surprise addition. Obviously, Jack Harvey, Ryan Hunter-Reay doing the Indy 500 on a one-off entry for the team. We'll start off with Harvey. So there was an easy transition to go into the Indy 500 only role with Ryan Reinbold. There's lots of random memorabilia in the shop, which is quite interesting. There's all sorts of bits and bobs, which is interesting. His teammates with Hunter-Reay when he was at Shank and he was at Andretti. So obviously not quite technically teammates, but they had a very close working relationship. Now there's the two of them. He said they're just a bit more focused now and it's a bit more interpersonable than it was previously. I spoke to Jack, just seeing what he thought, what he learned last year. Obviously on the sidelines helping out. He said particularly leg, less so Siegel. But he said last year gave an option to observe, and he learned a lot, which will carry into this year. Didn't really have the pressure of it, which was something he hadn't really experienced before. He's going to be around races for the course of the season, but isn't planning to do anything pre-May, and his focus is solely on the 500 until that point there. And I asked him as well, like we've said a few times, that Ryan Reinbold are interested in going full-time in 2027. I asked him if he'd be interested in it. He said small chat already to Dennis, nothing quite concrete yet, but it's something he's actively discussed with Dennis to get involved in, whether that's in a driving role or another role. And so that was quite significant. Then he had a little bit at the end about pit reporting. Definitely did not shut him down. It's something that he seemed to be very vocal about, being very interested in.
Yeah, I think one thing that stood out most for me from Harvey, I mean, he was sporting a suit with the sponsor Invest on the front of it, which is the sponsor that he had for, well, the majority of the season last year as he ran with Dale Coyne Racing. But he said that 2024, kind of linking to what you said, he said about the aspect of being on the sidelines, it really kind of hit home just how important it is for him and the partners doing the Indy 500 with all those eyes on it. So just with a full season budget not feasible, he decided that Indy was the way he wanted to go for this year. And as we've spoken about in recent weeks, there is real belief both from Harvey and Hunter-Reay that, yes, okay, there's drawbacks to being an Indy-only entry. You know, you don't have the full season rhythm, but also being an Indy-only entry, you have personnel who are focused for an extra long period of time solely on running the Indianapolis 500. So there's drawbacks, there's positives. Harvey thinks there is super potential here in this team. He knows their capabilities, and yeah, there's not loads to add. Obviously, we spoke to them recently, Hunter-Reay and Harvey. I think just to latch on to the points about possibly wanting involvement with Fox and the broadcast. Harvey was, he certainly didn't shut it down, did he? He said he wouldn't even see it as a plan B, which I thought was interesting. He said it's kind of taps into the race fan side of him. And then Hunter-Reay was even more interesting on that. He spoke even kind of more honestly. It almost felt like he was giving us a live job interview of why he was so suitable for a role as a pit reporter or in the booth. He's had a tiny little bit of experience before, I think, with NBC. But he said it's something that kind of comes naturally to him. He feels he could give a bit of a different perspective, having driven the current car. There's a lot of kind of nuances that he could relate to. So yeah, interesting. They're an interesting pair. I think they both seem to be looking forward to kind of working together. They obviously had worked together briefly previously when Harvey was in a Andretti-linked Meyer Shank entry in the 500 back in, what year was it, 2017?
2017, 18, 19, maybe a few years, 20 as well, 21, quite a few years.
Yeah.
Hunter-Reay on the broadcasting just said the driver perspective will help with intricacies like tyre saving, fuel saving, that sort of thing. I asked him about what keeps him going year on year when he's sort of got nothing to prove. He's won this race before. Says Indianapolis lives with him. And this is probably my favourite quote of the day. He would give anything other than his children and wife to be in the group of top three at the end, as we have year on year. 2027's asked him a similar question about the full-time opportunity. He said he'd be open to it. Wasn't quite as open as Jack was about having an opportunity there, but obviously he's likely been in a more advisory role like we see with Helio Castroneves, Tony Kanaan, Ryan Briscoe now, even to some extent Sebastian Bourdais. There's a few of them older drivers now sort of in support roles in their various teams. On the car, he wants cars similar to the 2012 to 2014 era, which were quite light and nimble. Went on about how he hated the aero kits, and then the cars look good, but since we've had to increase rate because of the aero screen and side intrusion panels and the hybrid and various other different safety features, which have only just put weight onto the car. So his overall goal was basically just to reduce the weight.
Yeah, I mean, he also mentioned that, just adding on to Dreyer and Reinbold's prospect for the 500, he does feel they are a little bit up against it this year, obviously with the added weight and getting used to the hybrid system as a team that does obviously not run the hybrid system the rest of the season, running only the Indy 500. So that's just something to kind of watch out for and consider as well. Yeah, this will all become more applicable come May.
Let's go back to the Ed Carpenter route with Christian Rasmussen. Obviously, his first full-time season. Missed out some of the ovals last year. Obviously, got promoted for the last couple of the year. And on those ovals, said he got a nice feel for them outside of the 500 because the 500 is a truly different beast. Gives him good momentum going into this year and has somewhat of an understanding of racing ovals in IndyCar now, which he's happy with. Looking back on last year, so he was probably expecting a little bit more from 2024. Said it was quite an up and down season, but the pace was good. But they lacked results, was what he sort of said. One top 10 throughout the course of the season for him. VK had quite a few more, so was expecting more on there. But going into this year, said there's more hope in the team and they're on the rise and there's good spirits. There seems to sort of be a feel-good feeling. Ed Carpenter Racing is sort of what I picked up recently. He was asked just about the progression with Jacob Abel coming into IndyCar as well as Louis Foster. Just reaffirm the value of Indy Next as a good training ground. You get the oval experience as opposed to obviously the European route, and it's giving people like him an opportunity to race in IndyCar. Yeah,
I mean, ECR is on the rise, is what Rasmussen said, and I think he used the exact words. Actually, there is a lot of hope. There's a good spirit. So there's clear belief there that the changes that have come with this investment. I mean, Splendor, which is one of the brands that is under this umbrella of Ted Gelov, who is the big primary investor that's come in as kind of co-owner with Ed Carpenter. They all had Splendor, Java House. I don't, again, these are American brands that I'm not too aware of, but they had coffee associated to the sponsor of the team. Good product placement in front of the cameras, which was quite amusing. But I think, the thing that just stuck out to me with Rasmussen was he just really wants to kind of transfer the pace and performance into results, and a successful year would simply be stepping forward, which I guess is easy to say, but this is his first full season that obviously he ended up running most of the races last year, but he can properly come into this approaching it as a full season. Obviously, this is I don't recall the exact details in the release, to be honest, but it was mentioned that this was a multi-year deal. But Rasmussen is acutely aware that he still needs to perform to stay in kind of position in the team. So there's a lot of encouragement. Ed Carpenter Racing, I'll have a bit of a feature coming out on that at some point. It's exciting times, I think, for them. It's good to see one of the quote unquote smaller teams, not one of the big four, having this sort of idea of potential. I think that was one thing I asked Ed Carpenter about, actually, was the potential, and he said that for sure, like, this should raise the potential of the team. Obviously, with Rossi coming in, that is a experienced driver, a proven race winner, an Indy 500 winner, and he's already settled well with the team. He's really bought into the vision, so good times, it seems.
What he did say was pressure was no different to previous years. Obviously used to being dependent on results to go up the ladder, and as well as chasing the leader circle last year, but said pressure's no different to previous years. He's sort of used to it and embraces it now, which was pretty cool. Now we go on to Connor Daly, returning after a couple of years full-time absence. He's obviously seemed to basically do a full-time program every single year because he keeps getting so many super sub appearances, but he's back for about the 6th time in the last 2 years. Says he's working on relieving self-pressure, which he feels like he's built up over the last couple of years. What he said was really interesting was he thinks Milwaukee is the only reason why he's here, which I'd be a bit concerned if they base their entire season based off on one performance on a bit of a random day where Pelot was out of contention power spot. No, that was race 2, actually. So I'm waffling. I'm making this up.
Yeah, it is an interesting point. I reckon maybe it was said slightly tongue-in-cheek because, I mean, maybe you can look at it from the perspective of, okay, Milwaukee was what secured the Leaders Circle contract, the Leaders Circle money, which was, yeah, that was why in the end that Daly's time with Hunkos at the back end of last season was kind of deemed as a success. I think the other reason that Daly is here is because of the business side that he is so good at. He's a fantastic personality. He really appeals to sponsors and he works tirelessly to obtain these partners, which is why he's got this deal together. You know, he's not your traditional pay driver, but he has brought the funding that is needed. I mean, it was mentioned that essentially now for a ride you need $8 to $10 million, which is incredible. I mean, he nodded along to that. So
he said 1 million sponsor back in the day used to be like an amazing deal.
Yeah, he was happy with a $1 million sponsor and no income himself to just go and drive as a rookie for Dale Coyne Racing back in the day. But I mean, he said very specifically he spends 98.9% of his time on the business side, and he's at peace with this other 1.1%.
No, he said 1.2%.
1.2%. So we got the maths wrong.
So he's got 100.1% of the time that everybody else does.
Okay, so he got the maths wrong. Nice one, Connor. But no, he said that his focus now can slightly shift to the driving side. I think there is still a little bit of apprehension just because we've seen how volatile things can be in IndyCar. A contract can, or funding running out can, you know, it's a factor. Like contracts have been broken or have been shown to be a bit flimsy. So he said it's still good to kind of live one weekend at a time, and you know that the attention span is very short in this sport, and that kind of you're only as good as your last lap. He knows. Well, he acknowledged himself there's so many good drivers out there waiting on the edge if you are to not perform or funding is to dry up. So, yes, he's trying to work on putting less pressure on himself, but also he knows that he has to kind of keep that same mindset. He did admit that it feels a little bit different because, I mean, for the first time since 2020, he's been able to get a new seat, for instance. He said it was quite painful because, you know, when he was having these one-off drives, they weren't going to spend the money to build him a new seat. So he was quite uncomfortable in the car sometimes. He's also got steering wheel grips. He's got a desk to review data. So it's feeling more homely for Connor Daly. And it's good to have him back. He's always great fun. He's a rambler in these press conferences. He started talking about Will Power having dad hair, whatever that meant. But no, it was good fun. It was good fun. He also spoke a little bit about Fox as well. Just the New Garden commercial, saying it put a smile on people's faces, and that Joseph's a star, and essentially that IndyCar, like we discussed yesterday, really needs to embrace the stars and embrace the personalities. He said that the advert shouted at your face, and that is exactly how it should be. And he also was. It was noted that he has driven for every team other than Penske and Ganassi now. Daly said he's going to the moon.
Hasn't driven for Prema.
He also hasn't driven for Prema. That was not acknowledged. Well done.
He wants to shrug off the oval expert. He's a bit tired of that, so he says he wants to remove that title a little bit because everyone's recruiting him for the ovals for the last 2 years, which is fair enough. And David Brown, who's one of the Hunkos mechanics, was one of the mechanics on his dad's F1 car at Williams in 1982. 43 years ago.
That is quite something.
Let's move on to Penske, and we'll start with Scott McLaughlin. Straight away, he said he believes he should have passed Power on the standings, which I found very interesting. We both crowned McLaughlin as our driver of the year. He's had a grossly underrated year, in my opinion, still. People still aren't giving him the recognition he deserves, but it was interesting. He said he doesn't believe he should have passed Power, which I completely and wholeheartedly disagree with.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny, actually. McLaughlin was speaking about where he felt like the championship was lost, and he didn't speak about the mechanical he had at Long Beach. He didn't mention St. Pete disqualification, which, you know, those two things at the start of the season meant he was on 5 points after the first two races. So I found that interesting that instead he earmarked his own crash in Detroit, being crashed out by Power in Toronto, crashing into Power at Laguna Seca. Those couple of run-ins as...
He was very annoyed at Laguna Seca. He said it's a stupid move whoever put it on my teammate, whoever put it on Kyle Kirkwood.
Yeah, exactly.
He placed a real emphasis on.
Yeah, I find it funny that Kyle Kirkwood was the name that he picked out of anyone. But no, I thought his perspective was interesting because I mean, if it wasn't for St. Pete and losing those points, he would have been the champion. So to say that he felt it was unjust that he finished in front of Power was interesting. He spoke again just to the Penske lineup and the competition they have, and he admitted they have ups and downs, and that's natural when you've got these three guys who are competing at the very top for championships every year. But he also said, it's a very open book. It's important that they've got this consistency year to year with real continuity in that lineup. And he said, all the bits of friction here and there, they're kind of normal at the highest level. But you always want to beat your teammates first. And in his only third and fourth seasons as an IndyCar and open wheel driver, he's done so. And he really feels that he needs to get off to a good start this year. Again, it wasn't really his fault that he didn't end up getting off to a good start last year. But he feels kind of in the same position coming into last season, which I think is justified, that he really has the ingredients to make that next step to win the title, and that ultimately he was only denied last year through kind of lady luck not being on his side and certain kind of circumstantial things. It was likened to his time in supercars when he kind of took a few years of constantly improving every season and then won 3 titles on the trot, and he did not disagree with that fact.
Said he thought Penske were quicker than Palou. Just they can't really execute very well, which is interesting, and I would probably also agree with that. They were quicker on Palou.
Yes, I don't remember the exact quote. I will just quickly flick through my notebook. But Will Power did also later say that he felt Team Penske. He believed there are no better teams than Team Penske at the moment, and that is despite obviously Palou's dominance, or kind of dominance, not quite so much last year.
Said Overwin gave him a lot of confidence after winning in Milwaukee and Iowa. Says he's going to put a lot of focus on Long Beach because that's the track he struggles at. So that's quite early on in the season. So a good early assessment point there. And he was asked about SVG and their upcoming Daytona 24 Hours appearance. He said his relationship with him is weird. They go out for beers and hang out quite a bit nowadays, apparently. Not quite their old rivalries back in the day down under. I thought that was not quite fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's just another... Yeah, coming up very soon. And just another interesting note, I think, from McLaughlin as well, was he contrasted kind of his mindset and driving style now to when he first came over to IndyCar. This is his 5th season. It's 5 years since he first tested an IndyCar, and he said that his mindset has changed completely, and he's a completely different driver. But certainly no worse driver, that is for sure.
Let's go on to a fellow Kiwi in Marcus Armstrong. He's obviously moving from Chip Ganassi Racing to Meyer Shank Racing, but he's keeping pretty much the same personnel, and obviously the alliance has come back together. So he says it doesn't actually feel like a transition, and that he's basically in the same team, just under a different banner. So that's something straight away, he doesn't really feel the difference between the two of them. We mentioned yesterday that Felix Rosenqvist coached him in Italian F4 back in 2015, I think. Maybe 2016. Anyway, he says he doesn't remember Felix's coaching very well. So
he said the only thing he remembered was Felix getting angry at Marcus for passing someone in qualifying into turn 1. I think was one thing he noted at Monza. But that is all he remembered.
Looking back on last year, he said ovals were daunting, but he enjoyed the challenge. Had good coaches in Franchitti, Dixon, and Palou. Then we asked him about the Indianapolis 500 because he didn't really get a run out because he didn't properly get any good race running. He says he doesn't feel like a rookie because he felt the motions were more important than the schedule of the actual month. He read through his sleep stats from May apparently recently, and he got 5.5 hours sleep average a day because of all the sponsor stuff and traveling between Carmel and all these other places, which was rather interesting. But obviously no real race running for him, but he sort of gets a feel for the structure of the month, which he believes to be more important.
Actually, I remember when we spoke to Stingray Rob, back in 2023, his rookie year, this was something that he really earmarked with the month of May as well, was kind of getting used to the structure and the schedule of the month as a rookie. Especially as a rookie, you have extra commitments as well, but that's a really important part, like in addition to on-track stuff as well. And now Marcus feels like he knows how to streamline that. And I mean, obviously he got race running in practice as well. It's obviously just not having that experience in the actual race situation.
So from Marcus Armstrong's first F2 season, him, Eilert, Lundgaard, and Schwartzman are now full-time in IndyCar. The Otto, Vips, and Porsche have all run IndyCar races, and both Aitken and Dragovich have tested Formula 2 cars, and that's just the field from his first F2 days. So I asked him why the transition was taking place so much. He said it's mainly down to the racing challenge and the product that was created. Described it as scruff of the neck, bit of a challenge, which was rather interesting, and that's sort of why that trend is going over. It's just an appealing option for sort of true racers and to keep them single-seaters. I used to share an apartment with Callum Eilert as well back in Maranello, when they were both part of the Ferrari Driver Academy. And in regards to a new car, it was a lighter car with more downforce, lower centre of gravity, and a forward weight distribution.
Yeah, I quite liked his description of the current car as an animal and brutally difficult, and that being kind of the appeal of it being like a proper racers series, the fact that you need to be fit and strong. But yeah, I think that's almost something that can't be lost with this prospective new car, but at the same time, it's clear the opinion is that that this has to happen, this change, and absolutely, because you need to keep up with modern technology, and it's fallen behind ultimately. But you've got to kind of keep this USP while also doing the things like taking the weight off and adding more power. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting perspective from Armstrong, actually. I didn't expect for someone who's only been in the series for a couple of years to kind of have that sort of perspective, but he clearly is quite in tune with the technical elements of racing.
We'll go on to Callum Eilert, and we'll do both Pro drivers in one go because they're obviously that's one real topic. Eilert says the rebuild is very different to Juncos Hollinger Racing. Obviously, he was in a single car program there for 2022 and a bit of 2021. So as the Carlin merger there sort of helped things go, and they had experience in Indianapolis. Prem is obviously brand new, no teams coming this way in ages, so that's a very different sort of mindset and process as opposed to his last team building. So there isn't much pressure though, because they don't really have any expectations, and all they can do is work with what they've got. Says his assessments will be sort of evaluated after 2-3 races because he's got no ideas where they stand. Street, road, oval, he's got to wait a couple of races before he really sort of makes any expectations for the rest of the season. Was asked about what Schwartzman may find difficult. Says it's going to be ovals, obviously, as well as skills like race length, fuel saving, physicality, which he's all experienced in parts of Formula 2, parts of WEC, but not to the same extent, not to the same method of doing it as he might have done in other series. So he's got those skills, but just not all in the same place, for example. Says Prem's got a nice blend of European background like Carlin, but it's got that American side as well. People like Michael Cannon coming in, Ryan Briscoe giving support as well. He said he knew at the end of 2023 that Prema were coming to IndyCar, so he had actually known for quite a while, was calling Rene Rosin quite a lot, asking for opportunities, sort of fell to radio silence, and then when he was close to renewing in WEC, that's when he got a last-minute call from Rene saying, let's do this. So he gave up on his WEC ambitions. He said he enjoyed WEC, but Prema was a nice route back into full-time IndyCar and come back to single-seaters. So they always need to be patient in their first few years.
Yeah, I mean, I asked him about just kind of, was the intention always to come back to IndyCar? And he did say he kind of left his options open through 2024. He clearly had this Prema idea in the back of his mind, having heard about it late in 2023, which was within, I guess, a month or two of finding out that he was departing Juncos. He was happy in WEC. He had some options on the table. He was happy in the situation he was in with Jota as well. But ultimately, when this Prema opportunity arose, he was not going to turn down the opportunity to come back to IndyCar, knowing how challenging it is to kind of get into the series. Patience was the big thing. I think one of my favorite quotes from the day actually did come from Eilert, who said, "It's not simple, but just keeping it simple is important because there are so many unknowns." That's the thing. As he said, it's too early for the team to really even set goals. And I did find it interesting that he said it kind of feels like a different situation to he was in with Juncos, who were coming into the series as essentially a new team, but obviously having that handover with Carlin, that kind of partnership acquisition there, that did mean there was some existing stuff in place, whereas with Prema, it's all completely brand new, and he described it as a team effort, obviously with these personnel coming in from an IndyCar background, Michael Cannon, who he described as IndyCar's own Einstein from an engineering perspective, but also people coming in that are familiar faces from the F1 world or from series such as WEC, for instance. So, yeah, I think it's all fluid at the moment in terms of Prema getting on track and testing. I think he did acknowledge there's going to be a lot of hard work ahead because everyone else has had this car for well over 10 years now, and Prema do not have a lot of time now before the season opener. So, yeah, it's unclear really where they will be. I think the pressure point is a person that won. Robert Schwartzman said that he's not really feeling much pressure. There's been times in the past through his junior career where he's incredibly highly rated that he's felt the pressure to win, and that's been tough. But here he feels like it's really something he can just enjoy being a part of and enjoy the process of building. And whereas if you joined a team that were already dominating, you don't necessarily leave your mark. Whereas Schwartzman believes that he can really leave his mark on this team at Prema. Obviously, Ilott is the veteran. He's still very young. So they're an interesting lineup. I think Schwartzman said that the team may have looked at both of them because they are familiar with their capabilities from competing with and against them on the European junior ladder. I just thought it was interesting that Schwartzman he's genuinely really excited and he's not particularly nervous.
So yeah, he says no expectations. He only gets nervous to something to lose, like could be winning a race or something, or in lead of a championship. So not nervous at all there.
He's an interesting guy, by the way. I mean, this is the first time we've really heard from Robert Schwartzman, and we'll get onto a moment his musical career / side hustle that he's been doing. But he came in and he was immediately, this was obviously his first IndyCar content day. He was immediately saying, "Oh, this is really well managed. I've never done this much media in a day, but it's really organized." And he speaks a lot, but speaks very well. He qualifies every one of his points very, very sincerely.
So it's that WEC wasn't for him, which is really interesting. He doesn't like sharing his car with other people because he just wants to drive. And he sort of missed that after his F2 days because he hasn't really been doing anything for a while. Schwartz. There's been a lot of testing and reserve roles in Formula E and in Formula One. And it was just the right time to move over his contract status. His Ferrari contract was expiring, so it's time to move over. And he just wants to remain a single seaters, really, which was his goal. But yeah, we'll get onto his music because he spoke about this really extensively. So his passion for music came from his dad from a very young age. It's not like listening to music. It's sort of the technical side in it. So his dad educated him in classic music, interestingly enough. But then he sort of understood how melodies are structured, how music's structured. Then he started listening to rock, heavy metal, all sorts of things like that. He was speaking about Michael Jackson for a little period in the pop industry.
But he was speaking about Michael Jackson, but calling him Michael. So everyone kind of had to just infer, yeah, okay, he's definitely talking about Michael Jackson here. But it's like they were on first name terms.
So he had a friend doing hip hop who was writing lyrics, and he asked to join in with his friend and to work on something together at that point. So then he started doing beats, learning from his friend. He'd obviously learned from his father as well. And him and his friend wrote a song together and they released it. And he says he personally quite likes it. He can't say it's the greatest, but as a baseline, it was kind of good and I was happy about it. But the issue with his song is he didn't have a promotional company that would promote it well because of where he was located, and that the location wasn't in English, so therefore the language wouldn't be of appeal to people. So he was having this whole crisis about how he wants to find like a management company to release his music, like it is being a racer. So there's a bit of a weird comparison there, but it sort of made sense. And if you want to know his song, it's called Active. His username on Spotify is Schwartzy, so it's just short of his surname. Your thoughts on the song?
I mean, it's not my type of music, but I actually thought it was pretty impressive. It sounded pretty professional. I mean, he said he's now on a break because of this whole struggle to find a promotional company, but he wants to pick it all up again in the US. So I've got a sneaky suspicion that this IndyCar move is not just about driving, but also a little bit about his musical career.
Says he likes the US because he won there in WEC as well. So
yes, and also I think this kind of interest in IndyCar, just going back to the driving side, is kind of stemmed from the test he had with Chip Ganassi racing a few years back. At this point, he was still on the Ferrari Formula One books, kind of acting as a test reserve driver there, and he was still contracted. So ultimately, he couldn't move over to IndyCar at that point, but this felt like the right time to him. His contract was up there, and he wasn't necessarily enjoying WEC massively, and he kind of missed the feeling of driving a car like an Indy car. It's funny, he hasn't actually raced a single seater since his F2 days. He's done a lot of mileage in an F1 car. He's done the IndyCar test, and he's done a Formula E test, I believe, as well. But that is as far as he's gone. He has not raced in a good few years in single seaters.
You could join the IndyCar band.
Yeah, our kind of discussed get some IndyCar drivers together.
Will Power, Colton Herta,
Will Power on the drums.
I don't know if any other drivers play instruments.
Yeah, I mean, Will Power plays the drums. Colton Herta, is he
plays the drums?
Guitarist?
I thought Colton Herta plays the drums.
Will Power definitely. Maybe we'll have two drummers here. Two drummers with Schwartzy rapping.
Yeah, Herta drums.
Okay, that might be a problem. We've got two drummers and a rapper. That might not be a fantastic band.
I reckon Newgarden plays the piano or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Someone must play the piano. Connor Daly actually told a funny story about Robert Schwartzman, who I think he said he'd never met before, but he think they just crossed paths at one point. And Robert Schwartzman said at 10 a.m. that he thought half the day was done. So Connor Daly said to him, "Welcome to the big show." Well, kind of in between Robert Schwartzman and Callum Ilott, we had Louis Foster and Joseph Newgarden. So, I mean, there's not a lot new to say about Louis Foster, to be honest. If you want to hear about or from Louis Foster, I would recommend going back and listening to really any of our 3 interviews we've done with him from sort of August onwards. We've spoken to him a few times at a few different milestones. I think the most interesting thing that we got from Louis today was just this kind of shift that he's having to make, which is really interesting, from being a champion and being a dominant champion in Indy Next to now being a rookie and a novice and someone who knows not very much again. He's joined RLL and all of a sudden everything's new. He said he doesn't, or when he first joined, he didn't know what he was doing in some ways, as he's joining this big mega shop in, I think it's Zionsville, Indiana, where the RLL shop, which is essentially Formula One standard, is, and it's all very new to him. So he said that you can't get by having won a championship with ego. You've got to just do the same process every year. And he said that he would be an idiot to assume he knew everything. So he's really keen to just keep learning. I think he's getting to a point now where he is getting a better understanding, having worked with the team for a few months, of maybe what the goals are. But there's just a lot of unknowns for him as a rookie. There's one more series organised full field test coming up before the season, Sebring International Raceway. I think Foster has now tested with RLL at Thermal and Laguna Seca, and he's completed most of his objectives. There's also some things outstanding. He said that fuel savings, one big thing that he's kind of trying to improve. It's definitely not been about pure pace. I think the pure pace should come fairly easily. That's something Graham Rahal mentioned yesterday. Live pit stops as well. Basically anything that can catch you out in a race is what they're really trying to hone in on and improve. Not loads new from Foster. Obviously, we've spoken to him quite a bit this off season, but yeah, just interesting to get that bit of perspective.
We'll end on the 2 Penske's that we haven't done. First of all, Joseph Newgarden. We'll get onto the funny bit in a minute. We'll start off with the ad. His first question was, how does it feel to be told you're better looking than Tom Brady? Newgarden said, I think Tom disagreed with that. He said the best part of the ad was actually Alex's bit, and they've done a really good job with it, which was quite funny. And he also said, I think the sequence about Alex starts connecting the dots about how he beat Newgarden in the championship last year and that sort of thing. And it all sort of links into each other in a bigger picture. And he was spoke very highly about Fox and saying how they will take it to new heights and that he's really excited about the process that was going on. He was asked about how he did the ping pong shot as well, which is quite funny. He claimed it was a lot of practice, and he blindfolded himself at home playing ping pong. Obviously, that's not true; it's all CGI. But, yeah, he was a good spirit. He was a good spirit. Was Joseph Newgarden.
I mean, for reference about the ping pong shot, if you haven't seen the ad, I mean, go and search it out. It's 45 seconds or so that you will feel like you have definitely not wasted. But he was essentially just doing some rapid fire ping pong against the half of the table, which was kind of propped up. But he said that the Fox deal and essentially these promotional commercial efforts are the platform that we have been missing in IndyCar. And he said, well, I mean, he essentially seemed blown away by the LA set that they had.
So they found out about Tom Brady the day before. Had no idea what was going to happen.
To clarify, the day before the commercial came out. So not even when he'd been filming it, which is pretty neat. Pretty good.
I had no idea. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. I think just to get onto some other stuff that Joseph said, I mean, a lot of the attention was on Fox. So that opened the door for us to just get a word in basically about how his 2024 season had gone, because it was obviously very up and down. He won back-to-back Indy 500s. He won the Indy 500 for the second year on the trot, becoming the first driver to do so for over 20 years. But at the same time, he finished, off the top of my head, he finished 8th in the standings, I think, in the end. And he obviously had the win at the start of the season in St. Pete taken off for the push-to-pass violation. For the rest of the year, he was obviously branded, fairly or not, as a cheat. Obviously with Penske having flouted the rules there was this perception of Newgarden as a cheat and a villain. And, you know, as far as he has ever said, you know, this was a complete accident. This was something he was not aware of. Again, we're not getting back into the weeds there, but he described 2024 as dynamic and said that he learned a lot. Resilience was kind of the big thing that he said that him and the team had taken away from it. But, you know, he really embraced and acknowledged the fact there were loads of highs and lows. But he said it was actually a transformative year for him. And he's even kind of spun the negatives into positive lessons that he's learned. And despite the waviness, as he described it, the team are rallying ready and excited for 2025. I also just asked him as well about the new car as well, just to get his opinion as well, as one of the, you know, often most outspoken and candid drivers in the series. And he said that the team kind of behind working on it are doing a great job. They're giving time for feedback and opinion. But again, he'd said that reducing the weights is absolutely critical, while kind of adding a bit of horsepower, more stable aero platform, he said as well. But they also don't want to disturb or overhaul the racing product. He also acknowledged as well that racing kind of in the pack, after a few cars back in the pack, racing does need to improve in the Indy 500 as well, which I agree with.
For your interest, Newgarden became the moderator to his own press conference.
Yes, that was amusing. So me and Dan over the last couple of days have kind of been in a continuous call, just, you know, planning and all sorts while the press conferences have been going on. And Dave first, the moderator, presumably just nipped away, I don't know, and Newgarden arrived slightly early. And then we heard this voice and Dan was like, "Who's that?" And I was like, I think that's Joseph. So he'd basically done the whole introduction to his own press conference, the first question that's always asked by the press conference moderator, and answered it himself. And then he showed great interest in basically what goes on behind the scenes and all the hands up on Zoom, which is always us. He asked Dave how he chooses who to pick. At which point Dave quite amusingly said, "Oh, well, Archie just pays me $100."
Well, no, Newgarden said you take bribes, and he was like, "No, but that's a good idea." And then Archie owes me £100 or something.
That was it. That was.
And
it.
then,
I'm sure.
And then you went first and said that's another $5.
Yes, you might be able to find this actually. It's worth a mention. The IndyCar on Fox YouTube channel have actually started posting the full press conferences, which was something that was never done. I don't think NBC even had an IndyCar specific channel, to be honest. It was mostly it was all done on essentially motorsports on NBC. So you may be able to find this press conference on the IndyCar on Fox YouTube channel, or any of your favorite drivers, anyone you're interested in. These are available, which I think is a massive step, because I mean, the coverage of the press conferences, you've for a long time relied upon us as journalists kind of conveying that information rather than them actually being publicly posted anywhere. So that's another positive step from Fox.
We'll end off with William Power. He had a bit of personal news. He signed with Fernando Alonso and Oriol Servia's management group, A14 Management. He highlighted a slight question about Le Mans to do with this signing and how obviously Alonso's got a European links, but he specifically said Le Mans a couple of times, which I thought was rather interesting. When he was sort of pushed a little bit more for that, he said, it's a cool event, I haven't been able to do it, and it's definitely on the radar.
Yeah, I mean, the whole situation is it's pretty interesting. This news came out around sort of mid-afternoon that he'd signed with this the Fernando Alonso's management company. I mean he was citing that essentially he wanted the contacts that it offers, but also he was no longer having to kind of be his own manager. He was able to really focus a bit more on the driving. But I think it is a coincidence for sure, given that Power is in a contract year and there is an awful lot of talk, which he said he keeps getting told about. He's completely aware of that. You know, there's a lot of rumors that David Malukas, having signed for AJ Foyt, who have the relationship with Team Penske, may step up at the end of the year to replace Power, who is, you know, obviously getting into kind of his mid-40s. Power maintains that, you know, the team have said nothing. He said, I mean, there might be some truth given the reports are out there, but, you know, just described it as one of those things. He's not someone that really delves into contract talk. He didn't give a timeline or anything for when he wants things solved by. But ultimately, he said the goal is to remain with Penske. But it is interesting that he's looking at these other avenues for sure. But retirement from IndyCar is still not something he's considering anytime soon. He said that he feels he can absolutely be competitive for another 5 years and wants to remain in the series as long as he's still competitive. And right now, he believes he's still performing at a really high level. And even now, in this kind of late stage of his career, he still feels like he's learning things every single season.
He was pressed about Malukas a little bit, and he wasn't really telling either way, was he? He was not saying shutting it down, but he was neither saying that he would or wouldn't be in the car next year. So I didn't seem overly confident.
He did actually say, I've just kind of reading through my notes here, that being in a contract year is some of that with the decision to sign with A14 Management. So that is something to consider. I think it's definitely on his mind. He's not going to be drawn on it and say too much publicly, of course. But I think we've said this before, and this is one thing we're really going to watch out for this year. He needs to start this season well because, I mean, Newgarden was handed a new contract last year. That happened just after the Indy 500 in Detroit, which was the start of June. So it's going to be the early part of the season that is really critical. If Power is maybe leading the championship by Detroit, for instance, then maybe they're going to think, okay, we'll hand him another year, we'll hand him another couple of years. Whereas if he's having a bad start to the season, that's where they may consider, right, okay, he's out of contract at the end of this year. This might be the time to part ways after all of this time and bump Malukas up if he also starts the year well.
Said, so last year was the first year in a long time that he hasn't got pole position. So he actually spoke quite interestingly about that, saying he didn't want to get poles and ovals because it hurts you in a dirty air. So it hurts you clean air, because when you get to a stint in dirty air, it takes you an entire stint to get your head around it. But qualifying on the road courses is very important to him. His qualifying wasn't that bad. He had the third best average of anybody, and one of the two ahead of him was Carl Larson, who didn't really count. So I don't see why that was a massive issue, but he just, on paper, did not get a pole last year for the first time in a very long time. IndyCar's most successful ever qualifier. Interestingly, spoke about getting victories. Highlighted that Palou only got 2 wins for the whole of last season, as we know. So yeah, Power said winning 3 races in the season is very, very difficult, and he was happy with the way he performed last year because Palou only won 2 races, and he said, I should still be driving in that series if I'm winning more races than the champion. He deserves a seat in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point as well. He's clearly still super motivated with Power, and you know, obviously he wants to stay at Penske. I think even if he didn't stay at Penske, his teams would still be all over him, trying to acquire his services because, as shown by last year, after a tricky 2023, he can still get better year on year as well. just kind of reflecting back on the last couple of days, do you have any particular highlights, any particular stories that were particularly interesting to you?
Kevin Simpson really does not like pickles.
Well, that's a big one. Got traction on social media for sure.
Yeah, it started a little, continued on Picklegate, which he didn't mean to. Hurter's lack of interest in F1. Well, not lack of interest, but he wasn't as... It's not like he didn't care, but he wouldn't mind either way. You thought he'd be more, knew exactly what he wanted for a super license, know exactly how he's going to get to Cadillac. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for me, that Herter in F1, he's really not as interested as people make him out to be.
Yeah, I don't know whether it is necessarily a lack of interest, or I think, as he kind of said himself, he's just a bit fed up of talking about it. He feels like it's been going on for half a decade now. So that could be part of it as well. I think he did obviously acknowledge that he's got a big decision to make. So it's clearly something that is on his mind. But also he's got an IndyCar championship to win this year. After coming pretty close last year, finishing second is his best ever. So yeah, that's a standout story for me as well. I think just obviously all of the opinions that were kind of canvassed on both, well, the encouragement of what Fox are doing. I think the positivity there is genuine. And then also the talk about the new car as well. Obviously, Alexander Rossi, I thought, gave a particularly good answer. You'll be able to read a piece on that in the next few days. I'm going to work on that. So that's a big one. I think the fun that we had with Joseph Newgarden and his acting moderator, that was a nice way to kind of end off the couple of days. But no, it's been fun. It's been good fun, and I can't wait to kind of deliver more content for everyone off the back of it, and just get you in the mood for the IndyCar season, which is coming up as this drops. This will probably go out on Thursday, so at that point it is 43 days until cars hit the track for practice in St. Pete. Not long.
Thanks to all the people at IndyCar who made this possible, as always. Fun little couple of days. So thanks to everyone there who lets us in on Zoom. And thanks to the drivers as well. Some good answers. Some fun characters as well in there. But for you new listeners, if you haven't listened to the podcast before, what we've been doing over this off-season is going through IndyCar history. And every half a decade, we'll give you a little story that you may not have heard of before. Just slowly going through the IndyCar era all the way from the early 1900s into present day, and where by the time we reach St. Petersburg, we should hopefully be up to the modern day. So a little story here and there for every bit of the decade. We're now on to the latter half of the 1970s.
So a key theme, as we've kind of worked through from the start, has been the Indy 500 has been the major event throughout. So, I mean, going back into especially the early 1900s, there was not an awful lot of documentation about the regular season of what is now the IndyCar series. So just kind of running through this 1975 to 1979 period, it started as a period of a lot of rain during the Indy 500. In 1975, it rained 20 minutes before the end of the race. Cars were spinning on track, which is something you definitely wouldn't see nowadays, an Indy car spinning on an oval because of rain. Bobby Unser won that race from Johnny Rutherford and AJ Foyt, three of a few drivers that didn't spin in the rain. A year later then, in 76, rain again denied a great finish, with 6 of the top 10 in the race having won the Indy 500 before. It rained again as they were about to restart, and Johnny Rutherford won from AJ Foyt for a McLaren Indy 500 win. The following year would then see AJ Foyt join the 4-time Winners Club, obviously a very exclusive club to this day. It was actually a period of some pretty significant and quirky firsts. In 1977, Tom Sneaver was the first driver to have a single qualifying lap over 200 miles per hour. So that's going back now almost 50 years since the first qualifying lap over 200 miles per hour. That was his first and second laps. And then in 1978, Sneaver repeated this, but all 4 of his qualifying laps were in excess of 200 miles per hour. Then also in 1977, James McElreath became the first driver to enter an Indy 500 in which his father was also racing, and Teddy Pillett was the first third-generation entrant. Unfortunately, though, neither of those drivers actually qualified for the race, which was slightly unfortunate. Another kind of important and really significant milestone was that Janet Guthrie became the first woman to qualify for the 500 in 1977. She was the fastest driver on the second qualifying weekend and qualified 18th in the end for the race. She would go on to finish 9th the year later in 1978. And she raced this year as she finished 9th with essentially one hand. She cracked a wrist, but how? How do you think she cracked her wrist, Dan?
How do I think she cracked her wrist? Is it anything to do with driving?
It's nothing to do with driving.
I'm going to say she fell in the shower.
She did fall, but it was during a charity tennis match. I mean, plenty of drivers play pickleball in the paddock at IMS, so be careful, everyone. You don't want to do what Janet did, although the fact she still finished 9th was very impressive. She didn't seek any medical help until after the race. But in 1979 is where things really ramp up, and there's quite a major story in IndyCar's history that commences here. So what is now known as IndyCar racing was sanctioned by the governing body USAC from 1956 up until 1978. But in 1979, CART came into the equation, which led to the start of split championships, which would become something that would define IndyCar for the best part of 2 or 3 decades. And it was, the beginning of turbulent times for IndyCar racing. CART was basically a governing body organization racing series formed by a number of the existing USAC team owners, essentially the top teams allied to CART, which was deemed quickly as the championship of the greater prestige, which led to there being 2 national championships in the United States. And the Indy 500 remained a part of the USAC championship, which was the less prestigious of the pair. USAC initially denied entry to the Indy 500 for a number of the CART teams, which had been leading outfits in USAC. That led to a court injunction, which did ultimately allow CART teams to participate. Rick Mears won this Indy 500, only his second attempt. And interestingly, 35 cars started this Indy 500 for the first time in over 45 years due to a debate over technical interpretations in qualifying. This was also the year where the pace car was used to pack up the field under caution for the first time at Indianapolis. It had actually been used elsewhere. But you will pick this up, Dan, next week in the 1980s. But this is the start of a very rocky story in the history of IndyCar racing.
But that's it for the 2 days of content day. So really hope you enjoyed it. Obviously a bit of a different episode to what we normally do, but looking at some upcoming weeks, obviously not too many weeks now until the season starts. Going to be looking at getting some more interviews for you between now and St. Petersburg. And before we know it, we'll have our predictions and then we'll have our preview and then we're back on the streets. It's probably 7, 8 episodes away now, so it's not very far. Less than that. I can't do my maths. About 5 or 6 now.
Yeah, 5 or 6.
6 or 7, 6 or 7 around then. So yeah, we'll see how that fares out. But hopefully you enjoyed IndyCar Content Days. We know we certainly did. If you're new, thanks for joining along. It's been great to have you. We hope you listen to the podcast for many more episodes to come.
I will also say, keep an eye out on our YouTube channel because we might do a compilation of some of our chats with drivers from across Content Day. We did that last year and you seem to quite enjoy it, listeners, watchers, so keep an eye out or so we'll ear out for that as well.
Get in contact with the podcast if you haven't already, at Life and Motorsport on Instagram. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the podcast, any suggestions, any feedback you got for us, any ideas for us to carry on during off season. We'd absolutely love to take on board with yourselves. But as we said, we hope you enjoy Content Days. Lots more to come between now and St. Petersburg. For this time, thanks very much for watching, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.